Hello, welcome to an episode of Flying High with Flutter. I'm your host, Alan Wyma. Today we have a returning guest. We don't often have returning guests, just a couple, and this is definitely one of the few. And he did mention that he was a little bit surprised that he got asked to come back, but that's a good thing, I hope. It's Kilian Schulte, is that right?
Yes. Hi. Thanks for having me again.
Yeah. So last time we brought you on for Jasper, right? Now we're bringing you on for Dart Mappable.
Oh yeah, happy to be back. Last time was about Jasper, like the web framework I'm building in Dart. Now it's about Dart Mappable, I think today. So another package of mine. Actually the first package I made, like the first Dart package I published to pub.dev, I think 2 years ago. And it's all about data classes and JSON serialization. It kind of an alternative to some other packages that there are. Like if you've worked with JSON and Flutter, you've probably heard about or even used JSON Serializable, which is like the go-to package there is. It's even maintained, I think, by the Dart team or somehow related to that. So it's kind of not really a competition, but it's in the same area. What Dart Mappable really focuses on is to be really powerful, have a lot of options, and really support all different kinds of use cases and classes and models that you want to throw at it.
Yeah, I mean, we were talking before the show. I guess, at least to me, I find that if you relate a topic to somebody, it becomes easier to kind of comprehend. And I guess the best way to say it is, how would you relate this to other packages in the ecosystem that are kind of similar?
Yeah. So as I said, the easiest one is to compare to JSON Serializable, which is a pretty simple yet very well made, I think, package for JSON serialization. So like you have your Dart classes that are your models to like represent some kind of data, and you want to serialize that and transform it into JSON to maybe send to an API, or the other way around, like you get some JSON data from an API and you want to transform that back to your data classes. And you don't want to do that manually because like it's a hassle and like maintaining that, and it's a lot of code and so on. So the package, and like both packages, mine and JSON Serializable, use code generation for that, to like generate all the code in behind the Dart data classes that like make it possible to transform from it to JSON. And the main difference is, so JSON Serializable is quite, I don't want to say basic, but it's at some point limited on what your data class can look like. So it's fine if you just have like a class with a few fields that have like, I don't know, it's a few strings and booleans or numbers or whatever. But it gets more and more complicated if you want to do some fancy stuff. I mean, classes can look all different ways. Like you can have some inheritance. You can extend some other classes and inherit from them. And you can have, so one big topic for Dart Mappable, it was always generics. So you can have generic classes, and you maybe want to serialize them to and from JSON. And this is really the point where like JSON serializable at some point stops working, or like you can't do certain stuff with it. And this is where pretty much Dart Mappable comes in, and I always like promote it, or like when I talk to people about it, it's like, as long as you have these simple models, that's fine. But like at some point, probably in your, like when you build a larger app, you have some more complex models and you still want to deal with them. So at that point, Dart Mappable comes in and helps you and can help you to do all that kind of stuff. And it's way more, that's why I say powerful, because like it supports all these different kinds of things that you can do. So that's the angle on the serialization part. But it's not just serialization, it's also data classes, which is kind of related. So JSON data classes usually mean you have the same model classes, and you want to maybe compare them, use equal on them, use toString on them, stuff like that. So you also have to generate, in that case, all the overrides for like the equal operator, for the hash code, and for the string. And that's also included in Dart Mappable. So for example, JSON Serializable doesn't do that. There are other packages, like I think the one of the most popular is Freeze to do that, that can generate those for you. With Dart Mappable, it's like one package that does everything pretty much.
I kind of want to go back on the complicated class, right? What would be a really good example of a complicated class that, say, JSON Serializable cannot handle, but you can handle with ease?
Yeah, so like the most straightforward thing is like a class with a generic parameter, like some class A of t, right? And then like t is your generic parameter. And there is, so it wouldn't be fair to say that JSON Serializable can't do that principally. It can do that, but like it requires a lot more like manual decoding stuff and encoding stuff like to do in your code. With Dart Mappable, you say, okay, I have some JSON and I want to decode it to my class so-and-so of whatever generic parameter we want to put it in, and it will figure everything out itself and do that for you. Like, and then the generic parameter can even like, so it can be another class that you want to decode. It can be pretty much anything. You can have multiple generic parameters, and all that stuff, including like then you deal with like lists maybe. So like you have a list t, and then t is whatever item you have in it, and you can figure that out.
Yeah, I also saw interesting is it seems like you have a lot of, I don't know, does Freeze have something like a from map? Because I don't remember that actually being there.
So freezed, when you use freezed, you get the data class part, but you can then on top of freezed also use JSON Serializable, because like those two packages, or like at least freezed is like made to work very well with JSON Serializable. So if you use both of those packages, you get like the whole package. And yeah, so then you have both serialization and data class part. I don't know if you meant with like from map that currently one of the key differences between from an API perspective between JSON Serializable and my package is that the method names for like encoding and decoding are different, and there's quite like a discussion behind that actually. So it goes about how to name like the method that transforms your data class into first a map, right? You have then a map of string and some values, and then that map you can give into like the actual JSON encoder from like Dart convert, and that then outputs a string. So what I did in Dart Mappable, you actually have like two sets of functions that can decode and encode your models. You have one like the toMap, which transforms your model into a map, and then you have your toJSON that's directly transforming to actually like JSON and outputs a string. So the signature is here like toJSON outputs a string. The other, how it's done in the other packages is that toJSON is the one function that outputs a map, and then you have to encode it manually. That led to some difficulties. Some people liked that very much how I did it. Some people didn't like it very much. So like I have feedback from both sides. It's still not clear, like if I want to change that maybe in some next big breaking version, because there's this other thing that when you have the toJSON that outputs a map, it's like better integrated in like the core JSON encoding part from like the core SDK. So yeah, that's like, I don't know if I want to get into that discussion, because it's less like mostly I think preference of like what you want your methods to be named.
Well, what's also interesting too is I did see that you support renaming the functions.
Yeah, I added that. It's like currently it's like a hidden feature. It's not really documented. You can find it if you go through like the actual GitHub issues. I added that because of like feedback I got, and like people were not happy with it, and then they had some use cases where they had to put in their models into other packages, and those other packages expected the other to JSON signature. So yeah, I as like an experiment to like how people would react to it and use it, I opened that up to make it configurable, but yeah, it's still like it's not really documented because I don't really want to advertise for it.
Yeah, I can see how that can be confusing because mostly, in my opinion, you wouldn't be using that mapper class, but maybe I guess it depends on how you think about things. But to me, it's like, well, I'm dealing with this thing, not this thing's mapper. That's what I think about in my head, but I can understand the other way around too.
Yeah, it depends a lot on like how you want to actually use the package and what your requirements are for like how you want to serialize and deserialize stuff. So it's really, yeah, it's like really depends on what you're doing and how you want to do it. I think really that the more interesting parts here are like what it like functionally does different and how it compares and what it can do that maybe others can't. So, and like we talked about that already a bit. So maybe like one thing I worked a lot on for the last version was that you have that CopyWith functionality that also Freeze has. So it is like a generator method that you can call to copy your model and just change a few fields, like whatever fields you want. And then it creates a new instance instead of like modifying. So there's like this idea of keeping your models immutable and copying that over. And one thing that like was requested by a user, and I found it very interesting, and so I worked on it, was the idea that you have in a inherited class structure with like superclasses and subclasses, that the CopyWith still works when you basically call it on the superclass. Like, so for example, you have the class animal, and then you have two extending classes, cat and dog, and some like the animal could have like name that like every subclass has that then too. But then the cat and dog has some specific additional properties. You can then of course call the CopyWith directly like on an instance of dog or on an instance of cat and like select the fields. But you can by now actually also call it if you just have like a variable of type animal and don't know if it's cat or dog, you can still call CopyWith on it and just like then the signature for the CopyWith function is just you can change the fields, like the name I said, I think, like the fields of the animal class, and it will still work fine. That like if you put in a dog, it would come out as a dog with like that name field changed. And if you put in a cat, it would still come out as a cat. So that's one of the features. I don't know, like when I started this, I looked into it. I think Freeze didn't have it. By now, I'm not sure because I saw they recently also did a lot of work on their CopyWith implementation. So I'm really not sure if they have it. But so just as an example, like these are things that like I try to work on to make a lot more stuff possible that maybe other packages don't support, and just whatever scenario you find yourself in, like in what way your data classes are modeled, Dart Mappable will at that point pretty much support it all. That's really like the big promise almost.
Well, I mean, it seems like it has like the package that Dart Mappable has like everything under the hood.
Mm-hmm.
I also saw that you have like hooks,
Mm-hmm.
and the hooks are mostly around decoding, right?
Yeah, hooks are actually like from the very first version. So hooks are a mechanism to hook into the decoding or encoding process of a class, like to when you transform a class to like a map of values. You can actually hook into that either before transforming the class or after. And so that gives you a whole another layer of like flexibility in what you can do. And that was also like when I first did the package, it was just out of curiosity, but also like out of personal need. like for me, the JSON serializable just wasn't. It didn't have the features I needed to have for what I was building. So I made that package. And so hooks were one of the first features that I did because like I noticed, okay, there are so many different custom logic you want to have in your Killian logic. And I think I give an example later, but like there's so many cases. So like it's really hard. And I don't want to try to like, from the package perspective, have like separate, very specific features for all different kinds of use cases. I just do the hooks, and then you can the user can pretty much do whatever he or she wants with while the class is encoding. So that's like a really powerful mechanism, I think. So opens up a lot of possibilities.
Yeah, I was thinking, like you said, like maybe you had some custom logic where you want to set a field based on certain data. Like that's basically what you're looking for, right?
Yeah, exactly. So one big use case I have for that currently in an app that I'm building is backwards compatibility. So we have an app that has to potentially talk to different versions of backend APIs because the app is like deployed through across different customer systems, and those customer systems have different API versions. So in the app I want to have one data model that has like just a normal Dart class with a set of fields, but the JSON that comes in and that I need to transform to that data model potentially looks different, has like a different set of fields, or like is also like has a legacy version and a new version. So there I use those hooks to like detect, okay, the JSON that's just coming in that I plan to transform into my model, is it the legacy version? Then I pre-modify the JSON while it's still JSON, so that it's then and like decodable by the package. So that's one big use case. So and there are others like that. So
okay, that's interesting. I mean, it would be nice if you can pass in maybe some extra data. I guess it depends on how you do your API, because I could imagine like maybe when you return a response, maybe in the head you might say what version of the API you're running. That could also make it easier for doing what you want to do. But then I guess you would just do that outside of the package rather than inside.
yeah, exactly. Like you could do that. You could build something like that with hooks. But yeah, that's then outside of the package and also like designed to be outside of the package because it's just a very specific maybe case you have. So yeah.
Yeah, but I mean, I guess I could also see like if you wanted to diagnose maybe why something's not parsing, so then you would just console log or something in between.
You could also use it to log something. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. That's interesting. I mean, let me see what else, because there's so many things you have here.
Yeah, it's like by now it's really a lot. Like it really evolved. Like it's right now it's at version 3, and it really evolved a lot because also like I put a lot of effort into have really all that, like to really be able to say, okay, Dart Mappable supports pretty much almost all ways you can build data models. There are really, really few cases that like won't work. And yeah, that just meant that like over time it became this super powerful thing that like you don't have to. So what I always like to describe it, like for JSON serializable, you kind of have to know, and for Freest even more, you have to write your data classes in a very specific way. At least you have to know how to write your data classes so they will work with JSON serializable. So like you kind of depend on the package, or the package tells you how to do stuff. With Dart Mappable, it's pretty much you just write your data class as you want, like however you want it to be. That's your first thing and your first thought. And then afterwards, you can just add like the annotations from Dart Mappable, and it would work. So you don't have to redo or like refactor your models just because you want to add the JSON package now.
Well, the other thing I'm looking at over here too is that you also have a way to configure this in different ways in terms of the package, right? Like you also have this YAML file where you can even specify like globally how the keys will be coming in and out.
Yeah.
So you don't need to say go back and manually put all those different keys in, right?
Yeah. You have some global transformation options. For example, like you can set a case style, so like that all your field names will automatically be converted to a specific case style. If you want to have a lowercase, uppercase, or like whatever, that's really like that's also quite good to have it. Like then you don't have to specify it for every class. You can still go in and like override that setting for a specific class if you want to, or even override the field name for a specific field. So you have like these different layers of configuration options. So either you go global, it applies to everything. Next level is like you go to the library, and then it applies to every model in that library, or you go to a specific model, or even to a specific field of a model. And that way you can really specify it in the most efficient way, I think, on like what the configuration would be.
Well, you also have the ability to have custom mappers, right? Which is basically, going from one field to another. You have an example over here about the URI, which I think is a great example.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So like it happens that you have like fields properties in your classes that are other types that you don't control. So like types that are defined in some other libraries. And at that point you can't annotate it. And like, so I skipped over that, but like how it generally works, you have to annotate your classes to say to Dart Mappable basically, hey, this is now a data model, please generate code for this. But like for classes in different packages, you of course cannot annotate them because you can't change the code. So at that point, for those classes, you can create like pretty much by hand custom mappers that just you can define like the encoding and decoding functions yourself. You define it once for a specific class or type, and then you can just use that class normally as like a property in your models, and it will figure stuff out.
Well, let me ask you this, because this is kind of sticking in my mind, right? So because the URI one you have, right? So URI, I mean, you can basically parse a string and you'll have a URI, and say your URI can have a protocol, can have, I don't know, username, password, domain, etc. Right? Now, if you go to JSON, you may not want to have all that. You basically want to do that to a string, basically, right?
Mm-hmm.
So how would something like that work?
The URI is maybe a special case because while it has all the different properties, like you said, like the schema and then the domain and then the path name and maybe the query and so on, when you serialize it, you don't really want that all that properties as like separate properties. You just serialize it as like a URI string, right? So like that's what it's for. So the example that uses the URI is just a transform, like it takes the URI object and transforms it to a string, and the other way around, when it comes in, like to decode it, it just takes a string, like and say URI.parse or something to parse it. So it's like maybe a special case for like you don't really want all the separate properties encoded as like JSON objects, but just use it as a string. But of course, like with other properties, you can do other stuff. So another example, what I used, so example, when you use the color class from Flutter, maybe you have a data model that has some colors. So you can define a custom mapper for the color class, and then it's pretty much up to you what you want the serialized value of a color look like, because it can either be a hex value of a color, it could be just a normal integer, but it could also be maybe a color name or something if you want it to be. So that's pretty much up to you what you want it to be in the end inside the JSON.
I wanted to go over back to the generic part, because you made very particular about generics, right?
Mm-hmm.
Now, generics is just difficult to handle when using like the serializable for JSON serializable, or because it doesn't seem too tricky necessarily. I mean, maybe you can shed some light on that.
Yeah. So the thing is, with generics, there are certain limitations that just you won't get to work, or at least like you have to find workarounds, or like be very it's quite complicated. So the one thing that is pretty much impossible is when you have a generic so like you have a generic function, like the decode function, and you pass a generic parameter. And that parameter could either be directly just the class, like decode animal, but it could also be something like decode animal of integer, if like animal is a generic class. At that point, your generic parameter is animal of integer, right? When you are inside that function now, and you have that t as like your generic parameter, there's pretty much no way to get to is it like what kind of animal it is. You won't get the int out of that animal generic construct. Because at that point, like it's just one type. You can just compare that type using maybe equality, or you can use a map lookup to other types, but like you can't destructure a generic type. I hope that's kind of clear what I want to say. And that's like the core problem that pretty much every serialization package has, that like the ideal world would be you just have a decode function and you pass in whatever type you want it to be. If it's a generic type, you just pass in a generic type, that's fine. And then it would figure it out. But that's kind of tricky. Now, Dart Mappable actually supports that, so you can actually do that. And it does quite some intricate magic behind that to figure out what that type is, what different mappers it has to call for that, how to invoke those mappers. Because like if you have a generic class, now your decoding function to instantiate that class also has to be generic, right? Like to instantiate your animal, it's like a generic function. So even Dart Mappable as a package has to then call that function with the int as a generic parameter. So it has to filter that out and call it. So there's a lot tricky stuff going on behind it. It actually like at some point I separated that out in a separate package. It's called type plus, which has all that type generic stuff manipulation bundled into a separate package. And if you want, you can use it separately. And that gives you a lot of control and a lot of possibilities on how you can deal with generic types, generic functions, and so on. That's like really the backbone of all that generic stuff that Dart Mappable can do that other packages can't.
Well, speaking of backbone, just looking at the documentation over here, specifically, you say that mapper container is the backbone of this whole package, no?
Yeah, that's the other backbone then, right? Yeah. That's the for the general implementation on like to figure out what mapper to call if you want to decode a type and what arguments to call it with and so on. It's like the core part. It works. So on a simplified level, it works that you just have like a large map that maps types to mappers, and mappers are the classes that then like actually have the function to like decode and encode. So you just do a large lookup in a map when you get in a type. You look up, okay, what mapper is associated with that type, and then call the functions of that mapper. What that enables you to do, and so I still have to find a really good use case for that, but in the end, everything is a mapper. Even for like primitive type, like int or string or something, I have defined some very lightweight mappers that are also in that large map of all the mappers. And you could, if you want to, you could go in and replace that. So you could go in and write a custom mapper for a string. And then basically all string fields will go through that mapper and you can write custom logic. As I said, like it's very specific thing that it's not designed to enable a specific use case, because I really don't know a use case, but it's just like because of how it is implemented internally, you can do that. Maybe someone will find a nice use case for that, but yeah, it's maybe good to understand how it works, that you just have those mappers and the mappers are responsible for one specific type, And then you have the mapper container that bundles all those mappers and figures out what mapper to call for like a specific instance of when you do it from JSON or to JSON or whatever.
Okay. Yeah, that makes sense. What I also like too about your package is the, how do you say that? Like you actually have a way to migrate from the existing packages. And I was looking at one of the things which was for Freest and the union type, which I really love that union type thing. But the way you're doing it seems like a little bit different than what I'm understanding, right? So you have this discriminator key. So that means that there's just a random key within the data that's backing it that makes a difference of it. Is that right?
Yeah. So that's the for the polymorphism structure, and that's not only for Freezes generally. So same example, when you have an animal and then a cat or a dog, at that point, it's like the key term is polymorphism, which just means that you have a base class animal that can either be one or the other. And then when you have get in JSON and you say to the package, okay, decode me an instance of animal, the package has to somehow figure out, okay, am I now supposed to decode it to a dog or decode it to a cat? And so that's where the discriminator key comes in. And the discriminator is just another property in the JSON that is used to really uniquely identify the specific subtype. So there would be like in your JSON would be just a property type which either has the value dog or has the value cat. And that's then that's automatically added. Like when you encode it, it's automatically added by the package, and when you decode it, it's like used by the package to look up which actual type it should be when you don't specify, when you just specify the base class.
Okay, I see what you mean now. Okay, that's interesting. That makes sense and interesting.
Yeah, and for Freeze, that's typical because like there you can like you define your union classes by you have one class and then you have like these different constructors that pretty much all represent different subclasses. And so when you want to decode, just say you want to decode an instance of your base class, then again the package has to figure out which actual sub constructor to call. And yeah, that's again then the discriminate key. So there is really a difference to that. It's just what you mentioned. So there is a small part of the package that just enables you to annotate these different constructors that Freeze uses. Because like with Freeze, you don't specify the subclasses yourself. You specify the different constructors, right? The named factory constructors. And I made it that you can just annotate those, and it will work just as if you would have annotated the subclass directly. And this way, Dart Mappable is actually also compatible with Freeze. So if you want to use Freeze because you like how you write your data classes, just like it's mostly on a syntax level, like you like the syntax, you want to use the syntax of Freeze, then you can also do that if you want.
Yeah, I thought that was pretty nice because it's pretty easy for me to understand because I'm so used to Freeze. So I guess that's definitely something that's nice. But what I also thought was quite interesting is maybe I'm wrong. Oh no, wait, no. So I am wrong. Now, what I was going to say is about like you have 3 packages you have to have installed. Of course, Dart Mappable, but then you have 2 dev dependencies, right? You got the build runner, obviously, which you need in order to generate the code, and you have Dart Mappable Builder. But I forgot. I think there's also a similar structure for Freeze at least too, right?
Yeah, it's the same for Freeze. It's the same for JSON Serializable. It's the same for pretty much every code generation package. Because the dev dependency is the code that runs to generate your code, to generate whatever the package wants to output. And it's just a dev dependency because you don't want to bundle that in your application later. And the normal dependency is then like the rest of the stuff that like is there to make the package work at runtime.
Well, I remember talking to the creator of Freeze, and he was saying that when Dart 3 comes out, we won't need the builder anymore. Maybe I'm wrong, but is this still the case where you can start to get rid of this thing eventually at some point?
I would guess he was talking about static metaprogramming, which unfortunately didn't come with Dart 3, but like, yeah, it's on the horizon. Like, they don't really have a clear date when it's coming, but they will be changing stuff to how, like, to code generation in Dart. Currently, it's using the build runner, which is a really separate build system. It has not, like, it's not integrated in the compiler or anything. It's just some external build tool that you have to depend on and use. In the future, the Dart team is working on integrating that into the compiler, so it will get a lot more smoother. It will have better developer experiences. It will probably be a lot faster to generate that code, because currently, if you have large projects, build runner is known for really taking a long time. So the experience will get a lot better, and of course, then all the different code generation packages will be upgraded to use that new system. But that's like, it's probably maybe even a year or longer until that's actually like stable in a Dart release. Like, I don't have any special info, but just like how it feels, because it was pushed a lot far back.
Yeah, because it would be nice to kind of get rid of this builder, because like you said, there's two things. Like, one is like it's an extra step that gets confusing for people who are new to Flutter. It's like, wait, this thing compiles and I also have to run a builder. What is that? And it's like and the command I think it's easier now, but like used to be even more confusing because of the way, like, it's like Dart pub run something. There's like 4 or 5 keywords before you even run the name of the builder, I think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's like quite a mouthful of a command. Yeah.
And it's changed a couple of times too, so it's even more confusing.
Mm-hmm.
That's like, they made it, I guess they made it somewhat easier. Like now it's like, I think it was always like Dart pub stuff, and it was like, what is that?
It was Dart pub run, and now it's just Dart run. But it's still like Dart run, build runner build, so like 4 words.
I thought they also changed it with Flutter now. Like they're trying to like put the word Flutter everywhere to kind of make things easier, because it's Flutter build, Flutter run. Yeah, that's what you can also use the Flutter keyword, right?
But yeah, I generally like that the system is a bit confusing at first, and also like in the long run still it's quite painful, because so also like if you do a CI build, the build runner, so for me most of the time the build runner was what took always the longest. So yeah, if they at some point make a better system, that's just awesome.
Okay.
And it's also like it enables a lot of like in code optimizations, probably, that you can do, like as a package author, that I can do, and other authors can do, because with that new way of code generation, they will also introduce like a new way how you can add to existing code, right? So one thing that's like you have with in some form or another, you have with all those code generation packages, you have to extend a generated class or mix in a generated class. So like for Freeze, it's like you have your class person and then extends like underscore $ person or something, was it, I think. With Dart Mappable, it's a shame, but it's like a mix in. You have to say class person mix in person mappable. And that's really because just a language limitation right now. To like add functionality to an existing class, you have to like have an extension or a mix-in, because the code generation tool can't just say, okay, now I want to add functionality to that class without the user pretty much seeing it or doing anything. So right now the user has to add those mix-ins. That will also change when they introduce this new static metaprogramming feature. So like the whole experience also for the user, and also what you can like do as a package author in your generated code will get a lot more smoother, hopefully.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to dumping this build runner. It's just annoying more than anything else.
No, it's great. Definitely like a great thing to look forward to. Yeah. let's see when it will happen. I mean, I know it's a hard thing to do. Like, I stand why they take so long, because doing that kind of stuff in the, like, integrating it in the compiler and doing it right is like really, really difficult. Because also, like, it's a lot of, I think it has a lot of security questions, because when anyone can kind of modify your code semi-transparently in, like, while you compile your code, like, there is a lot of potential for breaking stuff. So I think that's why they really take their time.
Okay. Let me just kind of ask before we start to wrap up, since we're kind of approaching, I think, about the end of our time. Is there, what's kind of coming up for Dart Mappable? Is there more features kind of coming, or is it just in maintenance mode? It sounds like you're still deciding if you want to change the names of some generated functions.
Mm-hmm. I would say it's not super decided. So it's definitely not in maintenance mode. Like, I want to continue on it. I don't think it's fully finished, but it is at a point where it's like really stable, and it supports like all different kinds. Like, there are increasingly fewer and fewer cases that won't work with it. So really, like, to have this what was the goal, to have like this package that supports all different kind of models that you throw at it. I think that goal is either reached or like super near. I don't think there is a lot of like low level rework I would have to do. Like, it's just about here and there, maybe a few smaller cases, maybe a few smaller bugs, but nothing really groundbreaking. And I mean, the method renaming, that's just syntax, right? So, like, at some point I decide, and then, like, I don't decide on my own. Like, that's why I take the time, like, to discuss with all the different peoples. And at some point I decide either for it or against it, and but that's like, then okay, you have to rename your methods, but like the functionality won't really change.
Okay, makes sense. Yeah, I mean, is there anything we should know about Dart Mapper before we kind of head off?
I mean, just try it out. It's really, I think, right now a great alternative to the other, like, JSON serializable, even freezed. If you want to exchange it, like, I've known couple people that like migrated to Dart Mapper from freezed, and it was really, I think, a good experience, because you can do it incrementally. Also for JSON serializable, like, you don't have to at one point just do all your models in one go. You can just do a couple of models and like increasingly maybe add more to it. So that's also a nice thing to have. Yeah.
Awesome. I guess one last thing is, if people want to get in contact with you, like, what's the best way to get a hold of you? I'm guessing not just make random bugs on the issue tracker, right?
So if you just want to have a comment or something, reach me on Twitter. But of course, if you have something really to contribute to the package, if it's like a suggestion or bug or whatever, just open an issue on GitHub. I'm usually quite quick to respond. And yeah, so either of those.
Awesome. Well, again, it's good to have you back on, and I'm happy to talk more about your work, because you're doing some interesting stuff.
Yeah, thanks for having me. It was a great time, and hopefully see you again. Okay.
Yeah, well, you'll see me every week, right? If you follow the podcast, but yeah.
Sure, yeah.
All right, thanks.